Yeah, hello. Tonight I will be reading a very special, one of my favorite scenes out of my favorite book, you can say. And since the scene is pretty long, I will not really talk much about it. I will just tell you this much, that so the book is Master and Margarita, and it was written by Mikhail Bulgakov. He was born in 1891 in Kiev, and he died in 1940 in Moscow. So he lived in the Soviet Union under Stalin, and during that time the communists tried to rid the Russian soul of God and everything that goes with that. So yeah, it was socially not accepted, to talk about God in public, or to run around with little religious icons that the Russians love. And in the 1930s, Stalin, he killed millions and millions of Russians who wouldn't quite agree with that idea. Like 30-40 million Russians or something. So that was quite not the time to publish a book that is pretty much about nothing else than about the question, does God exist or not? Does the devil exist or not? Who is the devil? What's his role really? And and this master, he's a writer in the book, and he's actually pretty much like Bulgakov. He writes a book about Pontius Pilate, and he can't publish it because society is against it. So I think I would just leave it at that, and I would just start to read to you the scene. It's chapter 2, Pontius Pilate. And that is the scene where Jesus comes before Pontius Pilate and gets his death sentence from him. So let's see. In a white cloak with blood-red lining, with the shuffling gait of a cavalryman, early in the morning of the 14th day of the spring month of Nisan. So there we have April again. Of course. There came out to the covered colonnade between the two wings of the palace of Herod the Great, the procurator of Judea, Pontius Pilate. More than anything in the world, the procurator hated the smell of rose oil, and now everything foreboded a bad day, because this smell had been pursuing the procurator since dawn. It seemed to the procurator that a rosy smell exuded from the cypresses and palms in the garden, that the smell of leather trappings and sweat from the convoy was mingled with the cursed rosy flux. The rosy flux. From the outbuildings at the back of the palace, where the first cohort of the 12th Lightning Legion, which had come to Jerusalem with the procurator, was quartered, a whiff of smoke reached the colonnade across the upper terrace of the palace, and this slightly acrid smoke, which testified that the century's mess cooks had begun to prepare dinner, was mingled with the same thick, rosy scent. O gods, gods, why do you punish me? Yes, no doubt, this is it again, the invincible, terrible illness. Hemicrania, when half of the head aches. There is no remedy for it, no escape. I'll try not to move my head. So the procurator is not feeling very well. On the mosaic floor by the fountain a chair was already prepared, and the procurator, without looking at anyone, sat in it and reached his hand out to one side. His secretary deferentially placed a sheet of parchment in this hand. Unable to suppress a painful grimace, the procurator ran a cursory, sidelong glance over the writing, returned the parchment to the secretary and said with difficulty, "The accused is from Galilee. Was the case sent to the Tetrarch?" "Yes, procurator," replied the secretary. "And what then?" "He refused to make a decision on the case and sent the Sanhedrin's death sentence to you for confirmation," the secretary explained. The procurator twitched his cheek and said quietly, "Bring in the accused." And at once 2 legionaries brought a man of about 27, Jesus was 27? From the garden terrace to the balcony under the columns and stood him before the procurator's chair. The man was dressed in an old and torn light blue chiton. His head was covered by a white cloth with a leather band around the forehead, and his hands were bound behind his back. Under the man's left eye there was a large bruise. In the corner of his mouth a cut caked with blood. The man gazed at the procurator with anxious curiosity. The latter paused, then asked quietly in Aramaic, "So it was you who incited the people to destroy the temple of Jerusalem?" The procurator sat as if made of stone while he spoke, and only his lips moved slightly as he pronounced the words. The procurator was as if made of stone because he was afraid to move his head, aflame with infernal pain. The man with bound hands leaned forward somewhat and began to speak. "Good man, believe me." Oh, that was a mistake. Can't call the procurator a good man, can you? But the procurator, motionless as before and not raising his voice in the least, straightway interrupted him. "Is it me that you are calling a good man? You are mistaken. It is whispered about me in Jerusalem that I am a fierce monster, and that is perfectly correct." And he added in the same monotone, "Bring the centurion, rat slayer." It seemed to everyone that it became darker on the balcony when the centurion of the 1st century, Mark, nicknamed Rat Slayer, presented himself before the procurator. Rat Slayer was a head taller than the tallest soldier of the legion, and so broad in the shoulders that he completely blocked out the still low sun. Because it's April, sun's low. The Rat Slayer got him now. The procurator addressed the centurion in Latin. "The criminal calls me good man. Take him outside for a moment. Explain to him how I ought to be spoken to. But no maiming." And everyone except the motionless procurator followed Mark Ratzlayer with their eyes as he motioned to the arrested man, indicating that he should go with him. Everyone generally followed Ratzlayer with their eyes wherever he appeared because of his height, and those who were seeing him for the first time also because the centurion's face was disfigured. His nose had once been smashed by a blow from a Germanic club. Mark's heavy boots thudded across the mosaic. The bound man noiselessly went out with him. Complete silence fell in the colonnade, and one could hear pigeons cooing on the garden terrace near the balcony, and water singing an intricate, pleasant song in the fountain. The procurator would have liked to get up, put his temple under the spout, and stay standing that way. But he knew that even that would not help him. Having brought the arrested man from under the columns out to the garden, Ratzlayer took a whip from the hands of a legionary who was standing at the foot of a bronze statue, and, swinging easily, struck the arrested man across the shoulders. The centurion's movement was casual and light, yet the bound man instantly collapsed on the ground, as if his legs had been cut from under him. He gasped for air, the color drained from his face, and his eyes went vacant. With his left hand only, Mark heaved the fallen man into the air like an empty sack, sat him on his feet, and spoke nasally in poorly pronounced Aramaic. "The Roman procurator is called hegemon. Use no other words. Stand at attention. Do you understand me, or do I hit you?" The arrested man swayed, but got hold of himself. His color returned. He caught his breath and answered hoarsely, "I understand. Don't beat me." A moment later he was again standing before the procurator. A lustreless, sick voice sounded. "Name?" "Mine?" the arrested man hastily responded, his whole being expressing a readiness to answer sensibly without provoking further wrath. The procurator said softly, "I know my own. Don't pretend to be stupider than you are. Yours." "Yeshua," the prisoner replied promptly. "Any surname?" "Ha-Nozri." "Where do you come from?" "The town of Gamala," replied the prisoner, indicating with his head that there, somewhere far off to his right in the north, was the town of Gamala. "Who are you by blood?" "I don't know exactly," the arrested man replied animatedly. "I don't remember my parents. I was told that my father was a Syrian." "Where's your permanent residence?" "I have no permanent home," the prisoner answered shyly. "I travel from town to town." "That can be put more briefly in a word, a vagrant," the procurator said and asked, "Any family?" "None. I'm alone in the world." "Can you read and write?" "Yes." "Do you know any language besides Aramaic?" "Yes, Greek." A swollen eyelid rose. An eye clouded with suffering fixed the arrested man. The other eye remained shut. Pilate spoke in Greek. "So it was you who was going to destroy the temple building and called on the people to do that?" Here the prisoner again became animated. His eyes keys to show fear, and he spoke in Greek. Never go. Here terror flashed in the prisoner's eyes, because he had nearly made a slip. Never, hegemon, never in my life was I going to destroy the temple building, nor did I incite anyone to this senseless act. Surprise showed on the face of the secretary, hunched over a low table and writing down the testimony. He raised his head, but immediately bent to the parchment again. All sorts of people gather in this town for the feast. Among them there are magicians. So this is the procurator speaking again now. There are magicians, astrologers, diviners, and murderers. The procurator spoke in monotone. And occasionally also liars. You, for instance, are a liar. It is written clearly, incited to destroy the temple. People have testified to it. These good people, the prisoner spoke, and, hastily adding, hegemon, went on, haven't any learning and have confused everything I told them. Generally, I'm beginning to be afraid that this confusion may go on for a very long time. And all because he writes down the things I say incorrectly. Isn't that the truth? Silence fell, but now both sick eyes rested heavily on the prisoner. I repeat to you, but for the last time, stop pretending that you're a madman, robber, Pilate said, softly and monotonously. Okay, so not like I just said it. You have to imagine him sitting there, not moving like stone, talking like this all the time. There is not much written in your record, but what there is enough to hang you. No, no, hegemon, the arrested man said, straining all over in his wish to convince. There's one with a goatskin parchment who follows me, and keeps writing all the time. But once I peeked into this parchment and was horrified, I said decidedly nothing of what's written there. I implored him, burn your parchment, I beg you. But he tore it out of my hands and ran away. Who is that? Pilate asked squeamishly and touched his temple with his hand. Matthew Levy, the prisoner explained willingly. He used to be a tax collector, and I first met him on the road in Bethphage, where a fig, that's a word, is it Hebrew? Is it a Hebrew word? Anyway, it means the town of the fig tree or something. Something like that. Yeah, I don't really, something like that. Anyway, on the road to in this town of a fig tree, and it goes where a fig grove juts out at an angle, and I got to talking with him. He treated me hostilely at first and even insulted me. So this Matthew Levy guy insulted Jesus. That is, thought he insulted me by calling me a dog. Here the prisoner smiled. I personally see nothing bad about this animal that I should be offended by this word. The secretary stopped writing and stealthily cast a surprised glance not at the arrested man, but at the procurator. Well, we'll find out what this dog thing is about. However, after listening to me, he began to soften. Yeshua went on. Finally, threw the money down in the road and said he would go journeying with me. Pilate grinned with one cheek, because he thought that was really funny too. Baring yellow teeth, and said, turning his whole body towards the secretary, like this, because he can't move his head because it's aching, so he's turning the whole body like this. And he says, "Oh, city of Jerusalem, what does one not hear in it? A tax collector, do you hear, threw money down in the road." So, yeah, you think that's quite funny. I think it's funny too. Not knowing how to reply to that, the secretary found it necessary to repeat Pilate's smile. He said that henceforth money had become hateful to him. Yeshua explained Matthew Levy's strange action and added, "And since then, he has been my companion." His teeth still barred the procurator, so he's still smiling, he still can't believe it. Great. His teeth still barred, the procurator glanced at the arrested man, then at the sun steadily rising over the equestrian statues of the hippodrome, which lay far below to the right, and suddenly, in some sickening anguish, thought that the simplest thing would be to drive the strange robber off the balcony by uttering just 2 words, "Hang him." To drive the convoy away as well, to leave the colonnade, go into the palace, order the room darkened, collapse on the bed, send for cold water, call in a plaintive voice for his dog Banga, and complain to him about the hemicrania, and the thought of poison suddenly flashed temptingly in the procurator's sick head. So he's thinking, just get it over with, because I can't take it anymore. My head is killing me. I want to go to my dog. That's what he's thinking. And if this pain keeps up, he's thinking about killing himself. So he gazed with dull eyes at the arrested man and was silent for a time, painfully trying to remember why there stood before him in the pitiless morning sunlight of Jerusalem this prisoner, with his face disfigured by beating, and what other utterly unnecessary questions he had to ask him. So he's kind of hating his job right now. Matthew Levy, the sick man asked in a hoarse voice and closed his eyes. Yes, Matthew Levy, the high, tormenting voice came to him. And what was it in any case that you said about the temple to the crowd in the bazaar? The responding voice seemed to stab at Pilates' temple. What was inexpressibly painful, and this voice was saying, I said, Hegemon, that the temple of the old faith would fall, and a new temple of truth would be built. I said it that way as to make it more understandable. And Pilate replies, and why did you stir up the people in the bazaar, you vagrant, talking about the truth of which you have no notion? What is truth? And here the procurator thought, oh my God, I'm asking him about something unnecessary at a trial. My reason no longer serves me. And again he pictured a cup of dark liquid. Poison, bring me poison. And again he heard the voice. Okay, this is now, I have to have a drink now to this. The truth is, first of all, that your head aches. And aches so badly that you're having faint-hearted thoughts of death. You're not only unable to speak to me, but it is even hard for you to look at me. And I am now your unwilling torturer, which upsets me. And I am now your unwilling torturer. You can't even think about anything, and only dream that your dog should come, apparently the one being you are attached to. But your suffering will soon be over, your headache will go away. The secretary goggled his eyes at the prisoner and stopped writing in mid-word. Pilate raised his tormented eyes to the prisoner and saw that the sun already stood quite high over the hippodrome, that a ray had penetrated the colonnade and was stealing towards Yeshua's worn sandals, and that the man was trying to step out of the sun's way. Here the procurator rose from his chair, clutched his head with his hands, and his yellowish, shaven face expressed dread. But he instantly suppressed it with his will and lowered himself into his chair again. The prisoner meanwhile continued his speech, but the secretary was no longer writing it down and only stretched his neck like a goose, trying not to let drop a single word. Well there, it's all over, the arrested man said, glancing benevolently at Pilate. And I'm extremely glad of it. I'd advise you, Hegemon, now what comes next, this could have changed everything. I'd advise you, Hegemon. So the prisoner Jesus talking to Pilate. I'd advise you, Hegemon, to leave the palace for a while and go for a stroll somewhere in the vicinity, say in the gardens on the Mount of Olives. The storm will come. The prisoner turned, narrowing his eyes at the sun. Later on, towards evening. Okay, I kind of, this doesn't make no sense. To leave the palace for a while and go for a stroll somewhere in the vicinity, say, in the gardens on the Mount Olives. A storm will come. Okay, So, and then the sentence stops, and the sun blends him, and he looks down, and then the sentence goes on. The storm will come later on, towards evening. So, a stroll would do you much good, and I would be glad to accompany you. Certain new thoughts have occurred to me, which I think you might find interesting, and I'd willingly share them with you, the more so as you give the impression of being a very intelligent man. The secretary turned deathly pale and dropped the scroll on the floor. So he just can't believe that somebody would talk like this to the procurator, because what he's doing, Jesus is not talking to the procurator. Jesus is talking to Pontius Pilate. He's talking to the man. He's talking to the feeling person, you know. So let's see how that goes. The trouble is, the bound man went on, not stopped by anyone. So the procurator is not stopping him either. That you are too closed off and have definitely lost faith in people. You must agree, one can't place all one's affection in a dog. Your life is impoverished, hegemon. And here the speaker allowed himself to smile. The secretary now thought of only one thing, whether to believe his ears or not. He had to believe. Then he tried to imagine precisely what whimsical form the wrath of the hot-tempered procurator would take at this unheard of impudence from the prisoner. So what is he thinking, right? Talking to the man instead of the title. And this the secretary was unable to imagine, though he knew the procurator well. Then came the cracked, hoarse voice of the procurator, who said in Latin, "Unbind his hands." So he was kind of impressed by the prisoner talking to him like that. One of the convoy legionaries, wrapped with his spear, handed it to another, went over and took the ropes off the prisoner. The secretary picked up his scroll, having decided to record nothing for now, and to be surprised at nothing. Yeah, what else should he do? So, admit, Pilate asked softly in Greek, that you are a great physician, because he thinks that he cured his headache. No, procurator, I am not a physician, the prisoner replied, delightedly rubbing a crimped and swollen purple wrist. Yeah, from the fetters. Scowling deeply, Pilate bored the prisoner with his eyes. And these eyes were no longer dull, but flashed with sparks familiar to all. I didn't ask you, Pilate said. Maybe you also know Latin? Yes, I do, the prisoner replied. Color came to Pilate's yellowish cheeks, and he asked in Latin, How did you know I wanted to call my dog? It's very simple, the prisoner replied in Latin. You're removing your hand in the air, like this. And the prisoner repeated Pilates' gesture, as if he wanted to stroke something. And your lips? Yes, said Pilate. There was silence. Then Pilate asked a question in Greek. He was probably calling Banga. And so, you are a physician? No, no, the prisoner replied animatedly. Believe me, I'm not a physician. Very well then. If you want to keep it a secret, do so. It has no direct bearing on the case. So you maintain that you did not incite anyone to destroy, or set fire to, or in any other way demolish the temple. I repeat, I did not incite anyone to such acts, Hegimon. Do I look like a half-wit? Oh no, you don't look like a half-wit, the procurator replied quietly and smiled some strange smile. Swear then that it wasn't so. By what do you want me to swear? The unbound man asked, very animated. Well, let's say, by your life, the procurator replied. It's high time you swore by it. Since it's hanging by a hair, I can tell you. His life is hanging by a hair. Because the procurator only needs to say 2 words and he's a dead man. That's why he thinks his life is hanging by a hair. It's hanging by a hair, I can tell you. You don't think it was you who hung it, Hegimon? The prisoner asked. If so, you are very mistaken. Pilate gave a start and replied through his teeth, I can cut that hair. In that too, you are mistaken, the prisoner retorted, smiling brightly and shielding himself from the sun with his hand. You must agree that surely only he who hung it can cut the hair. So, Pilate said, smiling. He likes it. Now I have no doubts that the idle loafers of Jerusalem followed at your heels. I don't know who hung such a tongue on you, but he hung it well. Incidentally, tell me, is it true that you entered Jerusalem by the Susa gate, riding on an ass, accompanied by a crowd of riffraff who shouted greetings to you as some kind of prophet? Here the procurator pointed to the parchment scroll. Obviously that's what it says in this parchment, that's how he entered Jerusalem, riding on an ass surrounded by a cheering crowd. That's how it is written down. So he's asking him about it. The prisoner glanced at the procurator in perplexity. What? He's thinking, what? I don't even have an ass, Hegimon. He said, I did enter Jerusalem by the Susa gate, but on foot, accompanied only by Matthew Levy, and no one shouted anything to me because no one in Jerusalem knew me then. Of course, he was new. Do you happen to know, Pilate continued without taking his eyes off the prisoner, such men as a certain Dismas, another named Gestas, and a third named Baraban? I do not know these good people, the prisoner replied. Truly? Truly. And now tell me, why is it that you use the words good people all the time? Do you call everyone that, or what? Everyone, the prisoner replied. There are no evil people in the world. The first I hear of it, Pilate said, grinning. But perhaps I know too little of life. You needn't record any more, he addressed the secretary, who had not recorded anything anyway, and went on talking with the prisoner. You read that in some Greek book? You read that in some Greek book? No, I figured it out for myself. And you preach it? Yes. But take, for instance, the centurion Mark, the one known as Ratslayer. Is he good? Yes, replied the prisoner. True, he's an unhappy man. Since the good people disfigured him, he has become cruel and hard. I'd be curious to know who maimed him. I can willingly tell you that, Pilate responded, for I was a witness to it. The good people fell on him like dogs on a bear. There were Germani fastened on his neck, his arms, his legs. The infantry maniple was encircled, and if one flank hadn't been cut by a cavalry term, of which I was the commander, you, philosopher, would not have had the chance to speak with the rat slayer. That was at the battle of Idistaviso, in the Valley of the Virgins. If I could speak with him, the prisoner suddenly said musingly, I'm sure he'd change sharply. I don't suppose, Pilate responded, that you'd bring much joy to the legate of the legion if you decided to talk with any of his officers or soldiers. Anyhow, it's also not going to happen, fortunately for everyone, and I will be the first to see to it. So, he still has to be some kind of hegemon, At that moment, a swallow swiftly flitted. What's this? At that moment, a swallow swiftly flitted into the colonnade. Okay. Describe the circle under. Well, I only know this book in German. That's why I just got this English translation for this video. Actually, I only been reading it in German, so this is new for me too. This translation to read it anyway. The book. So, describe. Oh, that's a bird. That's a kind of bird. That's the bird. Yeah. Described a circle under the golden ceiling, swooped down, almost brushed the face of a bronze statue in a niche with its pointed wing, and disappeared behind the capital of a column. It may be that it thought of nesting there. During its flight, a formula took shape in the now light and lucid head of the procurator. It went like this. So the procurator was having an idea. The hegemon has looked into the case of the vagrant philosopher Yeshua, alias Ha-Nozri, and found in it no grounds for indictment. In particular, he has found not the slightest connection between the acts of Yeshua and the disorders that have lately taken place in Jerusalem. The vagrant philosopher has proved to be mentally ill. Consequently, the procurator has not confirmed the death sentence on Ha-Nozri passed by the Lesser Sanhedrin. But seeing that Ha-Nozri's mad utopian talk might cause disturbances in Jerusalem, the procurator is removing Yeshua from Jerusalem and putting him under confinement in Stratonian Caesarea on the Mediterranean. That is precisely where the procurator's residence was. So what is this verdict here? He wants Yeshua to live with him by the Mediterranean Sea. He is dreaming about spending time with him, talking. Yeah. Enjoying the sea. It remained to dictate it to the secretary. The swallow's wings whistled right over the hegemon's head. The bird darted to the fountain basin and then flew out into freedom. The procurator raised his eyes to the prisoner and saw the dust blaze up in a pillar around him. Is that all about him? Pilate asked the secretary. Unfortunately, not. The secretary replied unexpectedly and handed Pilate another piece of parchment. What's this now? Pilate asked and frowned. Having read what had been handed to him, he changed countenance even more. Either the dark blood rose to his neck and face, or something else happened. Only his skin lost its yellow tinge, turned brown, and his eyes seemed to sink. Again, it was probably owing to the blood rising to his temples and throbbing in them. Only something happened to the procurator's vision. Thus, he imagined that the prisoner's head floated off somewhere and another appeared in its place. On this bald head sat the scant-pointed golden diadem. On the forehead was a round canker, eating into the skin and smeared with ointment. A sunken, toothless mouth with a pendulous, capricious lower lip. It seemed to Pilate that the pink columns of the balcony and the rooftops of Jerusalem far below, beyond the garden, vanished, and everything was drowned in the sickest green of Caprian gardens. And something strange also happened to his hearing. It was as if trumpets sounded far away, muted and menacing, and a nasal voice was very clearly heard, arrogantly drawling, "The law of Lese Majesty." Thoughts raced, short, incoherent, and extraordinary. I'm lost, and we're lost. And among them, a totally absurd one, about some immortality, which immortality for some reason provoked unendurable anguish. Pilate strained, drove the apparition away. His gaze returned to the balcony, and again the prisoner's eyes were before him. "Listen, Ha-Nozri," the procurator spoke, looking at Yeshua somehow strangely. The procurator's face was menacing, but his eyes were alarmed. "Did you ever say anything about the great Caesar? Answer, did you? Yes or no?" Pilate drew the word "no" out somewhat longer than is done in court, and his glance sent Yeshua some thought that he wished as if to install it in the prisoner. He just wants for him to answer no. To speak the truth is easy and pleasant, the prisoner observed. I have no need to know, Pilate responded in a stifled, angry voice, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant for you to speak the truth. You will have to speak it anyway. But as you speak, weigh every word, unless you want a not only inevitable but also painful death. So he's giving him the option to lie right now. You understand? No one knew what had happened with the procurator of Judea, but he allowed himself to raise his head as if to protect himself from a ray of sunlight, and from behind his hand, as from behind a shield, to send the prisoner some sort of prompting look. Answer then, he went on speaking. Do you know a certain Judas from Kiriath? And what precisely did you say to him about Caesar, if you said anything? Thinking, just say no, just say no. It was like this. The prisoner began talking eagerly. The evening before last, near the temple, I made the acquaintance of a young man who called himself Judas, from the town of Kiriath. He invited me to his place in the lower city and treated me to... A good man? Pilate asked, and a devilish fire flashed in his eyes. A very good man, and an inquisitive one. Oh, he was curious, wasn't he? The prisoner confirmed. He showed the greatest interest in my thoughts and received me very cordially. Lit the lamps, Pilate spoke through his teeth in the same tone as the prisoner, and his eyes glinted. He knows. Yes, Yeshua went on, slightly surprised that the procurator was so well informed, and asked me to give my view of state authority. He was extremely interested in this question. And what did you say? Asked Pilate. Or are you going to reply that you've forgotten what you said? But there was already hopelessness in Pilate's tone. He knew he wasn't going to lie. Among other things, the prisoner recounted, I said that all authority is violence over people, and that a time will come when there will be no authority of the Caesars, nor any other authority. Man will pass into the kingdom of truth and justice, where generally there will be no need for any authority. That was his death sentence. Go on. I didn't go on, said the prisoner. Here men ran in, bound me, and took me away to prison. The secretary, trying not to let drop a single word, rapidly traced the words on his parchment. There never has, so the procurator is speaking now, there never has been, is not, and never will be any authority in this world greater or better for people than the authority of the Emperor Tiberius. Pilate's cracked and sick voice swelled. I mean, he was beyond himself. He was really, he was besides himself. I mean, he can take a lot, obviously, but that was too much. For some reason, the procurator looked at the secretary and the convoy with hatred. He goes on, yelling at Jesus. And it is not for you, insane criminal, to reason about it. Here Pilate shouted, "Convoy, off the balcony!" And turning to the secretary, he added, "Leave me alone with the criminal. This is a state matter." So things are getting really serious now. This is serious. The convoy raised their spears, and with a measured tramp of hobnailed Caligay walked off the balcony into the garden, and the secretary followed the convoy. For some time the silence on the balcony was broken only by the water singing in the fountain. Pilate saw how the watery dish blew up over the spout, how its edges broke off, how it fell down in streams. The prisoner was the first to speak. "I see that some misfortune has come about because I talked with that young man from Kiriath. I have a foreboding, Hegemon, that he will come to grief, and I am very sorry for him. Very sorry for him." "I think," the procurator replied, grinning strangely, "that there is now someone else in the world for whom you ought to feel sorrier than for Judas of Kiriath, and who is going to have it much worse than Judas." So then, Margaret Slayer, a cold and convinced torturer, the people who, as I see, the procurator pointed to Yeshua's disfigured face, beat you for your preaching, the robbers Dismas and Gestas, who with their confrères killed 4 soldiers, and finally the dirty traitor Judas, are all good people? "Yes," said the prisoner. "And the kingdom of truth will come?" "It will, Hegemon." Yeshua answered with conviction, "It will never come." Pilate suddenly cried out in such a terrible voice that Yeshua drew back, like, "Ooh." Thus, many years before, in the Valley of the Virgins, Pilate had cried to his horsemen the words, "Cut them down, cut them down. The giant rat slayer is trapped." He raised his voice, cracked with commanding, still more, and called out so that his words could be heard in the garden, "Criminal! Criminal! Criminal!" And then, lowering his voice, he asked, "Yeshua Ha-Nozri, do you believe in any gods?" "God is one," replied Yeshua. "I believe in him." "Then pray to him, pray hard. However," Here Pilate's voice gave out. That won't help. No wife? Pilate asked with anguish for some reason, not understanding what was happening to him. No, I'm alone. Hateful city. The procurator suddenly muttered for some reason, shaking his shoulders as if he were cold and rubbing his hands as though washing them. If they'd put a knife in you before your meeting with Judas of Kiriath, it really would have been better. Why don't you let me go, Hegemon? The prisoner asked unexpectedly, and his voice became anxious. I see they want to kill me. A spasm contorted Pilate's face. He turned to Yeshua the inflamed, red-veined whites of his eyes and said, Do you suppose, wretch, that the Roman procurator will let a man go who has said what you have said? It's not done. Oh gods, gods, or do you think I'm ready to take your place? This is the real problem. He is scared to lose his job or lose his life. If he wasn't to treat him as a criminal for saying what he said. So now it's not the man speaking, it is the cold-hearted state, the cold-hearted head functioning as a statesman. Or do you think I'm ready to take your place? What if he did? I don't share your thoughts. And listen to me. If from this moment on you say even one word, if you speak to anyone at all, beware of me, I repeat to you, beware. Hegemon, silence, cried Pilate, and his furious gaze followed the swallow that had again fluttered onto the balcony. To me, Pilate shouted. And when the secretary and the convoy returned to their places, Pilate announced that he confirmed the death sentence passed at the meeting of the Lesser Sanhedrin on the criminal Yeshua Ha-Nozri, and the secretary wrote down what Pilate said. And this is what Bulgakov's, well, it's not a famous quote, but it's a really good quote, one that I like to quote sometimes. Further on in the book, Pilate learns that Yeshua Ha-Nozri said to Matthew Levy, because later Pilate meets with Matthew Levy and talks to him about Yeshua. And he reads a parchment that he had written about what Yeshua said, and there was one sentence Yeshua had said, and it goes like this: the greatest sin of mankind is cowardness. And this is exactly the point. It was the cowardness of Pontius Pilate at that moment to speak the verdict, to speak as a man of the state in his office as procurator, and yeah, because he was afraid he could lose his job, or he would have lost his life otherwise if he hadn't. But Pontius Pilate, the man, he felt differently about the case. The man, he dreamed about going for a stroll with Yeshua on the Mediterranean Sea and just, talk all night about whatever. But, yeah, he did not take his place for what he as a man believed to be right. He acted as a procurator, not as a man. And that haunted him for the rest of his life. And, yeah. So, that was Master and Margarita. Good night.